a world superpower, an empire that had stood for 1,000 years, still clinging to the glory of Rome. That empire was Byzantium, and its heart, Constantinople, was a beacon of Christian civilization. Now picture a force emerging from the scorching sands of Arabia, a force unified by a new faith, moving with a speed and ferocity the world had never witnessed. The year is 636 AD. The place is a desolate, rugged plateau in the Levant. The stage is set for a confrontation that will redraw the map of the world and permanently sever the ancient Roman Empire from its richest eastern provinces. This is not just a battle. It is the moment an entire civilization, the Christian Middle East, was lost forever. This is the story of the day Byzantium lost the Middle East, the epic Battle of Yarmouk. For decades, the Byzantine Empire and its ancient rival, the Sasanian Persian Empire, had bled each other white in a relentless series of wars. Emperor Heraclius, a military genius, had just achieved a miraculous victory over the Persians, restoring the true cross to Jerusalem and basking in a triumphant glory reminiscent of the Caesars of old. But peace was a mirage. While the two titans rested, exhausted and weakened, a third, entirely unforeseen power was gathering strength. South of their borderlands, in the vast, neglected Arabian Peninsula, the followers of the Prophet Muhammad had unified and exploded outwards in a movement driven by faith, discipline, and a desperate need for new lands and resources. The first Arab-Muslim incursions into Byzantine Syria were initially dismissed as mere raiding parties, the predictable antics of desert nomads looking for loot. Heraclius and his generals believed they could be repelled easily. They were wrong. The Muslims, under brilliant commanders like Khalid ibn al-Walid, the sword of Allah, moved with lightning speed, conquering city after city, Busra, Damascus, Homs. These were not raids, these were conquests. The local Christian Arab tribes, who felt more kinship with the mobile Muslim armies than the distant tax-hungry Byzantine administration, offered little resistance. The emperor watched in horror as his recently recovered essential provinces slipped away. He knew he had to deliver a knockout blow, a single crushing defeat that would annihilate the nascent caliphate and restore Roman prestige. This wasn't about holding a single city. It was about the survival of the empire's idea. Heraclius gathered a colossal army, drawing troops from every corner of his vast domain. Slavs from the Balkans, heavy Armenian cavalry, Frankish mercenaries, and the highly trained corps of the Imperial Byzantine army, the Tagmata. The total force is estimated to have been between 50,000 and 100,000 men, a massive number for the era, commanded by the Armenian general Vahan. It was an army designed to intimidate, an army of revenge and restoration. The sheer size of this force forced the scattered Muslim armies, numbering perhaps only 25,000 to 40,000, to execute a masterful, calculated withdrawal. This retreat, often overlooked, was a pivotal strategic move. The Muslims abandoned their newly won cities, pulling back to a place of their own choosing, a position they could understand and exploit, the plains of the Yarmouk River, along the modern border of Syria and Jordan. This was not a route, it was a lure. The terrain at Yarmouk was unforgiving. To the north were the volcanic, rugged Hara fields, difficult for cavalry. To the west, the deep ravines and gorges of the Yarmouk River itself, providing both a shield and a potential death trap. The Muslim commander, Khalid ibn al-Walid, saw the ground as his greatest ally. He carefully positioned his smaller force, anchoring his flanks against the dangerous ravines, ensuring that the numerically superior Byzantine army could not easily flank or envelop his lines. The Byzantines, weary from their march and confident in their overwhelming numbers, positioned their vast array of heavy infantry and cavalry across the plain. The armies faced each other for weeks, a tense, brutal staring contest marked by skirmishes and diplomatic exchanges. Vahan, the Byzantine commander, wanted to avoid a decisive battle, preferring to wait for an internal collapse in the Arab ranks, but his troops and his emperor demanded action. The Battle of Yarmouk officially began in August 636, under a blistering Syrian sun and high dry winds. For the first 4 days, the fighting was a seesaw of immense brutality. The Byzantine heavy cavalry, the cataphractoi were fearsome, repeatedly smashing into the Muslim right and left flanks. On day 2, the Byzantines launched a concentrated attack that shattered the Muslim right wing, pushing it back almost to the army's camp. This moment of crisis provided one of the first great psychological hooks of the battle. As the Muslim soldiers wavered, the women of the camp, reportedly led by a fiery woman named Asma bint Abu Bakr, seized tent poles and stones and physically drove their own men back towards the front line. This desperate act shamed the wavering men and solidified the Muslim commitment. Retreat was not an option. Khalid, however, was not just a warrior. He was an unparalleled tactician. He didn't rely on massed heavy infantry. He relied on mobility, quick thinking, and a devastating cavalry reserve, his elite mobile guard. Every time a Byzantine assault pushed deep into the Muslim line, Khalid would unleash a counterattack. Instead of committing all his forces in a single line, he used his cavalry to rapidly shift from one threatened sector to another, plugging the gaps and launching crushing flank attacks. This hammer and anvil tactic, executed with speed and perfect timing, kept the larger, slower Byzantine army constantly off balance. The Byzantines fought in massive, ponderous blocks, but Khalid fought like a boxer, delivering sudden, sharp blows that never allowed the imperial forces to fully consolidate their numerical advantage. The battlefield became a terrifying maze of charge, feint, withdrawal, and a brutal, chaotic close-quarters struggle that favored the light, flexible Arab warriors over the heavy, exhausted Roman troops. The psychological toll on the Byzantines was immense. They were fighting in a hostile, unfamiliar land, plagued by the elements and demoralized by the relentless, unorthodox attacks. They had assumed a quick victory over a rabble of desert fighters, but they were facing a highly motivated, unified, and brilliantly led professional army. By day 5, the Byzantines were exhausted, their morale was cracking, and their commander Vahan had run out of ideas. The decisive day, the day that would determine the fate of the Middle East, was about to begin. The stage was set for the final, catastrophic blow. The dawn of the final day, day 6, brought with it a shift in the atmosphere, both literally and figuratively. A fierce, dust-laden wind, a shamal, began to blow from the south, directly into the faces of the Byzantine army. This was not just an inconvenience, it was a blinding, demoralizing torrent of grit and sand that crippled the Byzantine archers and obscured the vision of the heavy cavalry. For the Muslim army, whose camp was behind the lines, it was a tailwind. Khalid, sensing the moment of supreme advantage, had prepared a final, bold gambit. He had spent the previous days weakening the Byzantine left flank, where the non-Roman auxiliary units were positioned. Now he prepared to shatter it completely. The initial Muslim attack was a massive, simultaneous push across the entire front, a relentless wave of disciplined infantry. But the real masterstroke came on the flanks. Utilizing the cover of the blinding dust storm, Khalid ordered a swift, perfectly coordinated cavalry maneuver. The elite mobile guard, his cataphractoi killers, was repositioned and launched a ferocious, unexpected attack against the vulnerable Byzantine left. This charge didn't just push the line back, it cracked it. The Byzantine auxiliary troops, primarily Christian Arabs, were overwhelmed and began to break formation, their commanders unable to effectively rally them in the choking dust. As the left flank began to crumble, Khalid didn't stop there. He launched a second, equally devastating attack on the opposite flank, the Byzantine right, which was held by the disciplined Roman regulars. This two-pronged assault, a full frontal push combined with simultaneous flank charges, left the Byzantine army with no room to maneuver and no reserve force left to plug the gaps. The sheer weight of the collapsing flanks pressed the vast Byzantine center into a dense, immobile mass. Crucially, the terrain, the deep, treacherous ravines of the Wadi al-Ruqqad, now played its final, fatal role. Khalid directed his forces to drive the panicked, tightly packed Byzantine center toward the ravines on the western edge of the battlefield. The Byzantine troops, already exhausted, blinded, and demoralized, found themselves funneled into a death trap. Many lost their footing and fell hundreds of feet into the canyon. Others, in their terror, were pushed into the chasm by the crush of their own retreating comrades. The narrow bridges and paths across the gorges were choked with men, horses, and equipment. The defeat rapidly turned into a massacre, a chaotic total collapse of the imperial army. The number of Byzantine casualties was staggering, conservatively estimated to be in the tens of thousands. The imperial commander Vahan was either killed in the fighting or executed afterward. The Muslim losses, though heavy, were minor by comparison. When the dust finally settled, the power of Byzantium in the Levant was not merely defeated, it was annihilated. It was a victory so complete, so irreversible, that the Emperor Heraclius, watching the disaster unfold from Antioch, reportedly lamented, "Peace unto thee, O Syria, and what an excellent country this is for the enemy." He abandoned all hope of recovering the province, packing the relics, his family, and the remainder of his treasures, and famously departed for Constantinople, his ship sailing through the Bosphorus. As he left the shores of Asia Minor, he allegedly looked back and bid farewell to the eastern lands that had been Roman for 7 centuries, uttering the heartbroken words, "Farewell, a long farewell to Syria." The consequences of the Battle of Yarmouk were immediate and seismic. Within a few short years, the Caliphate completed the conquest of the remaining Byzantine territories in the region, including the holiest city of Christendom, Jerusalem. The victory shattered the myth of Byzantine invincibility, a myth that had survived the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. The loss of Syria and Palestine meant the loss of vital manpower, tax revenue, and agricultural wealth, crippling the Byzantine economy and forcing the empire into a new, existential struggle for survival. The Levant, a land defined by Hellenism and Roman Christianity, was now permanently integrated into the growing Islamic Caliphate, becoming the cultural, economic, and political heart of a new world power. Yarmouk was more than a military victory, it was a civilizational watershed. The swiftness and finality of the defeat demonstrated the strategic genius of commanders like Khalid ibn al-Walid and the immense, focused energy of the early Muslim state. It marked the end of the ancient world's political order in the Middle East and the beginning of a new Islamic golden age. The echoes of that day, the shifting of power and the cultural transformation it initiated, continue to shape the world we live in today. Byzantium, though it would survive for another 800 years, would forever remain a diminished, besieged entity. Its focus permanently shifted toward Anatolia and the West. The sun had set on the Roman East, and the world was irrevocably changed by the decisive, epic, and catastrophic day Byzantium lost the Middle East on the dusty, windswept plains of Yarmouk. In just 6 days, the Byzantine superpower crumbled. Yarmouk wasn't merely a defeat, it was the catastrophic moment the ancient world order shattered. The genius of Khalid ibn al-Walid and a crippling desert wind drove the mighty Roman army into a deadly ravine, losing Syria forever. This single battle permanently reshaped the map of the Middle East,